This is the moment we've all been waiting for the thousands in attendance and the millions watching around the world. Let's get ready to
Welcome to the Junkyard Pod. Today we are continuing our series of What's Next, where we take a look at what to expect from various Cavs players moving into the summer. Joining me today alongside my co-host Jackson Flickinger, I could think of no one better to have on the show to discuss the future of Jarrett Allen than someone who the future of the Fro may directly impact, and that would be Bob Schmidt of the Fear the Fro podcast. Bob, thanks so much for joining today. I feel like this collab was long overdue.
Absolutely. I'm excited to be here. I've wanted to talk with you guys for quite a while.
Yeah, same here. I mean, I've really been looking forward to this, and this was just the perfect way for us to do it. And look, Bob is one of the best Twitter follows, truly one of the most creative people covering the Cavs. If you really want some fun and unique Cavs coverage, I can't recommend the Fear the Fro podcast enough. And hey, I'll have the links in the description to his Twitter, just in case there's a brand change that becomes necessary. But we'll get into that soon enough, because I do want to say quickly before we get started today that if you enjoy the Junkyard Pod, please consider hitting subscribe and dropping a like to help out the channel. We truly appreciate it. And just doing those two things goes a long way to support this content. So thank you so much in advance. And getting back to the matter at hand, I like to start each one of these episodes by briefly summarizing the season that we just saw. For Jarrett Allen especially, I would say it was a bittersweet one. So I want to pass this off to Bob and get us started. Can you just give us your general thoughts on the season we just saw from Jarrett Allen?
I thought it was fantastic up until, the last week and a half, 2 weeks, unfortunately, which that's the rough part, is that I spent so much of last summer frustrated with all the discourse surrounding him and his place on the team and his value to the team that I can't think of a season going much better than this one did for Allen up until he got hurt in the playoffs, because the regular season, not only were the numbers great, but his impact in that time when we needed him and Mitchell the most to be great. He strung together a fantastic run of basketball. He was largely healthy outside of those first 5 games or so until the very end. I mean, he strung together, 81 games in a row, and then to have it end like it did, it's disappointing. But on the bright side, I do think that regardless of how Cavs fans feel necessarily, I know there's a lot of them who have their criticisms of his toughness or just think that his fit isn't right. And so in that way, maybe they're not as high on him as outsiders would be. I think that's the nice part, is that I don't think the injury or his willingness to, take a shot or any of those storylines, I don't think that those are really prominent storylines amongst people who would be interested in acquiring a Jarrett Allen. So if there is a positive, it's that I can understand the disappointment. I'm disappointed too. He was absolutely murdering people in that Orlando series and the early part of this playoff. So I thought that we were going to escape this season with him having dispatched all of the criticisms that lingered from the Knicks series. I don't think we have now, but I also don't think that's entirely warranted. So I was very happy with Jarrett Allen, because if we're in a world where we're talking about him as a possible expendable piece and he's coming off arguably his best season, then I don't think that's a bad position to be in as a Cavalier fan, even if you are primarily a Jarrett Allen fan. Maybe that's a worse position to be in. But as a Cavalier fan as a whole, I don't think it's a bad situation to be in.
I think it's really good that you started talking about where we were at this time last year and where people thought he needed to improve. And I think rebounding is something that I thought he did an exceptional job of this season. You just look at the numbers. The Cavs were in the 75th percentile in defensive rebounds when he was on the floor. That is huge. They also, like we saw in that stretch, especially that stretch without Mobley in the middle of the season, he did a much better job of, I thought, handling the ball, especially with those dribble handoffs at the top of the arc. And I thought he was a lot more comfortable in those positions. And that's something that I think Mobley and him struggled with in that series against the Knicks. So with someone like Jarrett Allen, you're not going to see like the huge jumps in terms of like, oh, he's now a 3-point shooter, or oh, now he's added this crazy thing to his arsenal. But you just want him to keep getting better at the things that he's already good at, and I think we did. I think he did that this season, and I think that's what is most encouraging. And that run in the middle of the season really solidified that he can be. If he's on a team with more spacing, I think he just looks even better.
Yeah, you spoke to even just the marginal improvements, stuff that we don't turn to him to always have to do, but nearly doubled his assist percentage, lowest turnover percentage of his career. All those things were, they don't get the headlines, but they're all big parts of being able to. And this is one of the subjects that makes the whole topic of breaking up the front court difficult to think of, is because while there's obviously going to be definite upsides from taking any player at Jarrett Allen's level and shopping him and seeing, okay, well, is there other people that could come back? There's a lot of things in which the redundancy proved to be such a blessing to be able. I don't know if anyone going into that stretch where Mobley went down thought that Allen was going to be as integral in running stuff from the high post as he was during that whole stretch. And we've always known, he's a better screener than Mobley at this point. But the passing in that stretch and the dribble handoff game that he brought when we were very shorthanded was so much beyond anything that I expected. It's similar in a way to how I kind of felt coming into the season with Strus, where we had this idea of what he would be, or our purpose behind getting him as far as, movement, shooting, and gravity and all that. And then for him to bring all the ancillary skills, the creation, the, pick and roll game with Mobley, and then with Allen, and the secondary rebounding and all that stuff. That was stuff that was, found money. And I thought we got a lot of that with Jarrett Allen in that injury stretch too, when it came to his ability to kind of operate with the ball in his hands a little bit at the high post.
I think also it's really good to also point out how much chemistry he showed with Mitchell and how that really just spurred on everything. I feel like we've seen at times, and this is maybe more of a Mitchell conversation, that he's sort of struggled to get the big men involved, but he really found a nice flow with Jarrett Allen there in the middle of the season. And that kind of brought out the best of both players in a way that you want your best players to do. And I think that's when we're trying to evaluate the Cavs. That's one of the things that is really important to come back to, is that like probably the best chemistry between the core four was really between Mitchell and Allen this season. And if you're gonna, take Allen out of the picture, then you are losing something that was really impactful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's one of. Oh, I'm sorry, Tony. I didn't mean to step on.
Oh no, you're good. I was just gonna make a dumb joke. I was gonna say, in a season where the power of friendship was so vital, the two best friends, Allen and Mitchell, they really helped steer the ship, especially during that stretch when Mobley and Garland went down.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to, so much focus goes on the numbers and the pairings and the staggering, the Garland and Mobley are better, and Allen and Mitchell are better. But Allen and Mitchell are the only ones consistently, when those two are on with the other two off, that despite relatively disappointing analytics from both playoff runs, they've done so well together in the minutes that they've amassed in the regular season, that all of the samples, the combined sample, the regular season sample, the playoff sample, all of them are, north of a +7 net rating. So that's definitely something that I think a lot of people just cruise past. But I don't think people should take it for granted. This idea that the future is Mitchell and Mobley, I'm not saying that can't work, and I don't put everything into net ratings, but I do think that there's a certain element of taking how good Allen is for granted, because he's not some, new breed stretch five type. He gets things the old-fashioned way.
I think it's really important to highlight that little piece that you did about Mobley and Mitchell. Just, you can't just assume that because it worked with Allen, it can work with Mobley, just because we've seen throughout Mitchell's career, he struggled with Rudy Gobert, and the times that he has played with just Mobley out there, I think they haven't found that same chemistry. And that's not saying that they won't ever find that same chemistry or that they couldn't find that same chemistry, but you can't assume certain things. And I think that's just really important to keep in the front of your mind when you're talking about splitting up this core.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked to the strength of both tandems together. That's another thing is that, you don't even, regardless of who gets traded, whether it's Allen, whether it's Garland, whether it's Allen and Garland, whether it's nobody, there, this idea that it's like, okay, you're not just then focusing on that two-man pairing, whoever it may be, whether it's Mitchell and Mobley or whether it's Garland and Mobley, you're taking away one of the biggest strengths, at least analytically speaking, of this Cavs team in the past 2 years, is that they have consistently been able to separate those pairings, stagger their minutes, and generate very positive lineups, even when the other two members of the core four were off the floor, which I get can be argued as a negative. You're saying, well, we're wasting, a money allotment and positional versatility on guys that are essentially, supreme staggering options. But I would say that I wouldn't fight anyone who feels definitively that way on that opinion. I would just say that it shouldn't just be cast out again because we've grown accustomed to it, because we lived through the years when, the moment LeBron was off the floor, it was just a slow bleed until we had to ask him to, play hero again. And I do think there's a certain amount of, we know our health is not something that we can guarantee. So this idea that, we have expendable pieces of the core four, it's a risk. It's a risk that last year when Mobley and Garland went down on basically hours apart, we could find ourselves in a future situation where we have even less to prop up those rosters if we decide to do this fundamental shift of top-end talent for, overall role player depth that some people seem that they would prefer.
Yeah, I think that was very well said. Both of you really hit on basically, that was a perfect recap of Allen's season and how valuable he was. I mean, something that I've been saying a lot is that last year, if you go back and imagine if they had traded Allen and then this season plays out the way it did with Mobley and Garland getting injured, I don't know how well they're able to keep things afloat if that happens. Now, of course, that's a big hypothetical, but really, if you just look back at how low everyone had fallen on Allen last year, for him to return and dispel all those narratives throughout the year, perhaps he would have totally did it had it not been for the Wagners hitting him with a few elbows. But all throughout the year, Allen was gritty. He was tough. He was reliable. He was durable again until right up to the end. And all of those adjectives that were used against him last year became his strengths. And really, it's just a shame that his playoff run was cut short because he was having such a dominant start to the postseason. And I can only imagine what he might have looked like against Boston with their lack of rim protection in that series. Nonetheless, Allen, in my book, I think completely redeemed himself. And to even go further, just his time here in Cleveland so far, he's been one of the most enjoyable players I can recall being a Cavalier. And so it was a great year for Allen. Surpassed my expectations. And I was hoping for him to have a bounce back season. And I think he did even better than I would have imagined. To transition to something we already...
One thing real quick. I think bringing up that Celtics series, I think is a really interesting hypothetical because it felt like the Cavs had an advantage inside, especially, since Porzingis was out. And one of the things that we don't know is, like, if you are playing those two big lineups, can you really take advantage of a smaller team like that in a playoff setting? And I think that would have been really important because when I think about, some of the things that Bob was talking about with like the depth of being able to stagger guys and stuff, I think of that being more of a regular season advantage where it's like you know what you're getting every night. You're going to be able to put out 48 good minutes of, basketball. Whereas in the playoffs, you kind of want to maximize your five best players or your group of best five guys. And seeing a playoff where like a playoff series against a better team, but one that you might have an advantage against, I think would have been really helpful. And it's just a shame that Kobe's going to have to go into this offseason and make some decisions based off of something that we weren't able to actually see.
Yeah, I felt a lot of that watching the kind of success that Mobley had against Derek White, because when we got into those regular season series against the Celtics and we would see how frequently the Celtics will just switch everything, regardless of, size mismatches and disadvantages. You would get guards, you would get guys like Holiday. And I know Holiday and White are, they're exceptional defenders, but I would have loved to have the ability to try to punish that, just as an alternative to what's a very difficult ask of, even if Donovan was healthy, having to go against the kind of length and wing defenders that team could trot out. The other thing that's an interesting parallel is now with Kristaps in this situation he's in. I know they're up 2-0, but I wonder if he's going to get. I don't really wonder. He won't, but because people have come to expect him being hurt. But this whole conversation about taking shots and playing through the pain and when do you bring him back? Like, do you ask him to do it if Dallas rips off a win or a couple wins here? That's something I'm interested to see how it plays out, because in some ways it is similar to, I feel like, the criticism for Allen grew as our outlook got bleaker. So, justifiably so. I understand, but it's disappointing.
Yeah. And this episode will go up after the final, so it's good you didn't make any bold predictions there, because it could have came back to haunt you. But no, I think you made a good point there, and really that's the most frustrating part of not only Allen's season, but the way the Cavs season ended in general, is just that they had a prime opportunity to really see what this core four could do in that series, and just kind of lost the opportunity with Mitchell and Allen being injured. But to move us into our next topic, and we've kind of already touched on this, Jackson hit on it at the top. Something that surprised me was the way that Allen improved. I think it's something that most of us knew was possible, but we just kind of assumed that Allen had reached his ceiling during that All-Star campaign. But we saw him venture outside of his comfort zone at various points. I think of his increased usage, operating dribble handoffs, his comfort handling the ball, occasionally even stepping out to knock down that free throw line jumper. And I think Allen has consistently grown as a defensive anchor and an offensive player. I think he could continue to improve, even if it seems like he's closer to his ceiling than most prospects. The swing factor, of course, is always chasing that dragon of somehow extending his range to the three-point line. I wouldn't predict that. Again, I'm not going to write him off entirely. The free throw line, or the free throw shooting, has always been good for him, so it's not impossible. But I think really confidence goes a long way. This is a broader complaint we've had with the Cavs development, but if Allen had the freedom to do more things, not only shooting the three-pointer, but just handle the ball a little more, maybe we would have seen this come out of him sooner. I think being able to handle the ball and create plays for others is just as important for a modern big man as the three-point shot. If you can operate a dribble handoff, do some of the inverted stuff with your center above the break, that's really valuable. And I truly think Allen has the coordination to do some of those things. Now, how much better can he get? I'm not sure. So I want to pass this off to Jackson. Do you think Allen can continue to grow as a player? And if so, where would you like him to focus his development this summer?
I don't think he's going to develop as a shooter. That's really not a path that you see people his age take unless you're, Brook Lopez, which is a one-of-one situation. So I wouldn't say that, but I would like to see him kind of operate more in the high post. It just makes it kind of tough sometimes when you're trying to figure out lineups with one Mobley, and then the lineups without Mobley can, be a little unpredictable in terms of what you're getting on a nightly basis from some of the Cavs role players. So I think that Allen does have we've complained a lot about some of the Cavs prospects not having the most well-rounded game. I think Allen does have a well-rounded game, even though it's in the traditional center mold. So I think just getting better at the things that he's already good at, getting more comfortable, defending out in space, not saying that he's bad at that, but just, getting more comfortable at that, getting more comfortable at attacking switches, these little things like that, just improving just slightly. I think that's what turns you from a really good player to a great player. And those are the areas that I'd like to see Allen kind of focus on. And that's not the most exciting answer, but that's just kind of how I see it.
I share a lot of the same feelings. I think my pessimism is just the opportunities he's going to have to get those reps in game, because I think to a certain extent, we saw when Mobley came back, a lot of the stuff that was happening in the stretch when he wasn't there was not stuff we turned to Allen for. Operating more out of the high post, and then even in the dribble handoffs, the volume of those went down significantly after Mobley was back in the mix. And I think there's just such a priority on people wanting to see the development from Mobley, which I don't always agree with necessarily. It's not an argument I'll ever win, but I think there's plenty of stuff that we're looking to get more from than Mobley that we already have perhaps a better current version of from Allen, even if it's not an elite high-end one. Like, clearly Mobley's a little more fluid and faster moving, but his handle could be improved. His ability to, I think he's getting better in the realm of, creating contact with people and not getting quite as dislodged as he was early on. But Allen still has a size advantage in that regard. He's very good with both hands in a way that I think, Mobley could get to. But I think Mobley's a little more comfortable kind of fading on those like middle of the lane jump shots. For Allen, I think all the skills are there, not at an elite level. I think in a lot of ways, he's very good at almost everything outside of the range element of it. It's just he's not elite at any one thing. So I don't know that he's going to get those opportunities because I still think there's a certain element of the team banking on the physical profile of an Evan and hoping that with a little bit more agility and speed that there's a higher ceiling than what there is maybe on an Allen.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. And that's why, like, Allen, he just turned 26. And so theoretically, you would assume that he could improve. But really, I think it's going to be less of taking like any leaps as much as it's just going to be polishing the stuff that he's already good at, seeing how much better he can get at operating with the ball in his hands. Now, of course, he might not get that opportunity in Cleveland. And so I do want to transition this conversation to something somewhat related here. And let's frame it this way. Let's say Allen does not make any substantial leap, meaning, this most recent season is the peak version of what we can come to expect. I think a good question to ask is, how valuable is a player like Allen at the end of the day? We're talking essentially a rim running center who can anchor an elite defense, might have some offensive limitations when it comes to coexisting in lineups that don't feature for other shooters. So basically just not a guy who might fit in every situation. But is that archetype still something that NBA teams value? What's your take on this, Bob?
Well, I mean, if you want to look at the two guys that are hitting free agency this summer, I definitely think we're hearing a lot of conversation about what is the worth of a guy like a Hartenstein or a Nick Claxton. And Hartenstein, I hear his hometown discount number around 17 million. I hear, if Oklahoma City is going to lure him in, we're talking 20 million up. So I definitely think a player like Allen is valuable. He may not, Hartenstein can pass. He's not necessarily the spacer either, but he does a lot of extra things in the offense that I think Allen has shown he can do to a certain extent when he's given the opportunity. And Allen is, of course, an elite defensive anchor. So in that regard, I definitely think guys like that have value. That's why I would say my concern is that he's too valuable, that we won't find ourselves in a situation where when he hits his next contract, because there's no more restricted free agency advantage, we're going to be bidding against people who are truly giving him offers that are based on them making him the focal big, not part of a too big tandem. So you can very much make the argument that his worth to someone else will be very taxing for us to match when his next contract is here. So for all the conversations we have about the fit and all these things, my advocacy for getting a different big in here would be to just prepare for the future, because you essentially have a 2-year runway where he's still on this $20 million contract. And it has nothing to do with my love for his game or my belief that he has a very long-term place, a big runway ahead of him in the NBA. It's just, I think he might be a little bit too valuable for what teams would be willing to pay him, where what you're going to have to ask yourself in a couple of seasons is, can we afford to pay this guy who's in a timeshare situation with Mobley at the 5 nearly $25 to $30 million a season potentially? Because that, with this new CBA and everything going up every year, I don't think that's unrealistic to think that he's pushing that figure, barring some, terrible injury.
Yeah, I think the archetype is very valuable. I think the pendulum swung really far when the Warriors were doing their thing, and you made it think that, all right, like everyone's just going to try to get Draymond Green types. And really, like, Draymond Green's just a one of one. You can't really replicate what the Warriors or what Draymond Green provided even though he wasn't even a starter, but that's a separate conversation. But what I think this shift, how it's kind of shifted back in a way where traditional centers are really valuable, but you can't be a traditional center like a Robin Lopez traditional center that who can't guard in space, who can't do anything more than kind of protect the basket area. You need to have a multifaceted game and be really good at the things that you are good at. And I think that's where Jarrett Allen fits in really nicely. He's not somebody who you necessarily want switching onto the perimeter at all times, but we've seen many times that he can stay with guys out there, especially when the game's on the line. Remember that he stayed right. Yeah. I was thinking of who was it that he stayed with like the Trailblazers? That was like 2 years ago. That might have been 3 years ago. That was a while ago. It was either Dame or McCollum, but yeah, it was a while ago. But like we've seen him do that multiple times. We are like comfortable with him in those situations, and I think that's kind of what you want from your traditional big. So there is a market out there for him. He is still really valuable. The problem that the Cavs run into is that what they need, they may not be able to get with Jarrett Allen, and Jarrett Allen's still more valuable on this team than what they could get. So that's where it's just kind of like a really weird situation, and it's sort of unfair to Mobley. And I think Bob brought this up a little earlier. We were talking about Allen does a lot of the things that you'd like Mobley to do. He does them just better. And I think that's very accurate because like Allen is a better center. He's a better screen center. He's a better rebounder. I think he's probably even a better interior defender than Mobley at this point. But one of the problems that you've had is when you're trying to split those things with Mobley, it seems like he's trying to be a power forward and a center, and he's ending up kind of just not really growing in either area. So it's just like the Cavs are just in a really tough position, and I don't think when they went out and got Allen, they weren't envisioning pairing him with Evan Mobley. And I think when they drafted Evan Mobley, they weren't thinking, okay, this is the pairing we're going to have for the next 10 years. It just kind of sort of worked out that way. And that's what makes this whole conversation tough, because it's like you can see it multiple ways, but the Cavs do have a problem because it's really tough to play with just 3 shooters on the court, and JB Bickerstaff wasn't able to figure it out. You hope that the next coach would be able to figure it out or could provide better solutions, at least. So this is where it's just a tricky situation that the Cavs are currently in.
Yeah, and well, originally they were going to pair Allen with Andre Drummond, so Mobley ended up being an upgrade in that department. But I get what you're saying. The issue is, and like it's kind of, I'm going to try and blend the two things that you guys are saying here, because
they weren't trying. I don't think they were trying to do that with Andre Drummond, because they offered
ended up doing it, but
they offered Drummond the contract and he said no, and then they traded for Allen. So
yeah, well,
they tried.
They were out there
like
together.
They should have rolled them out together.
You can't erase the history, Jackson.
I'm just trying to give the Cavs some credit for not thinking that would work.
I see the issue that you're bringing up, though, because and really it's such an interesting thing with Allen, because he doesn't get enough credit for his versatility. There's not many centers who can do the things that he does on offense and defense, who are that agile and swift. And then you look at his contract, $20 million a year for how good he is. That's honestly a steal. The role that he has accepted without any complaints. Not many guys that good would accept that contract and play this role, where ideally the way the Cavs are structured, this isn't how it's played out, but ideally you would want Allen to be your 4th best player behind Mitchell, Garland, and Mobley. Now I think he's arguably been the 2nd or 3rd, depending on how you value Garland. It depends on what season you're looking at. Like 2022 is probably Garland number 2. Most recently, it was Allen number 2. And so when you combine those two things, it's a really interesting issue the Cavs have, because, and you hit on this earlier too, it's like the Mitchell-Allen pairing has been one of their best duos. And so what do you do with that guy? But again, to kind of focus on this topic right here before we move on to the pros and cons and kind of the reality of what it might look like if we moved on from Allen, I do just want to say, again, agreeing with a lot of what has already been said, he has the coordination to handle the ball and I think do even more than what we've seen from him. Even if he doesn't necessarily improve, even if this is the best Allen ever gets, I think just about every NBA team could use a guy like Allen, someone who can anchor their defense. He's still switchable. He's not someone who can only play in drop coverage. He can do just about anything defensively. And the limitations, they primarily come on offense. But even then, I think you can build a high-powered offense that includes Allen as an interior scoring threat who can be used in creative ways, even if that doesn't include a three-point shooting option. So I just think Allen truly is, of course, I'm biased, but I think he's one of the most underrated players in the NBA. I think there's a lot of teams out there, if they can get Allen, they're going to jump on that opportunity.
Tony, I will say that you need to have a conversation about what underrated means, because you think that everybody's underrated. So we need that later.
I have a theory that I believe applies almost universally, which is like in the situation with Mobley and Allen. I often wonder, I'm like, how would our own fan base look at these two guys if Mobley was the one we traded for and Allen was the one we drafted? Because so much of what I see is guys get a lot longer leash in terms of loyalty from their most diehard fans when they've been there from day one, when they were there on the hype train, when after, watching the draft profiles, when they got behind them when they were drafted, but we never even seen them play from the summer league and all that, to the point where I feel like sometimes guys are at a disadvantage when they come in after already having been associated with another team when it comes to our own fan base's loyalty to some extent. Because I don't know if it's like whether it's underrated or just underappreciated or somewhat taken for granted. Maybe those are the same thing. Maybe there's some sort of distinction between the two, but I definitely think there's an element of that. That this is what the normal way of things happening would be eventually Allen gets moved and then Mobley struggles and everybody turns on Mobley, in the absence. That would be how it would go. Way that things go. But my hope would just be that even if you don't appreciate Allen, even if people think that what he does is fairly replicable, that they're not in a rush to get rid of him until the Cavs have a better man to fill his minutes in place than an ancient Tristan Thompson or a buyout Marcus Morris. So regardless of how anyone feels about Mitchell, I think another interesting conversation to have is how to address it, because while trade machine stuff is fun, I think an argument could be made that the Cavaliers, they have a 2-year runway here to figure out what they're going to do if they do plan to pivot, where when you hit that 1-year mark, I mean, you saw it in Toronto, a guy can have a ton of value, but his value will diminish the closer he comes to being able to walk away in unrestricted free agency. So there's this like balance that has to be struck between moving on a pivot too soon, if that's the way that things are headed. You want a chance to try to get some sort of fallback plan in place or some cheaper option that could fill a lot of the void that moving an Allen would create. But you don't want to move him too late to the point that he would walk away in an unrestricted free agency without a chance to use his money to bring back something of value to the team.
Yeah.
And I would say it's one of the problems that the Cavs have, because they have like essentially 3 positions on the roster. You have like 2 really good centers. You have point guards and shooting guards, but mostly shooting guards. And it's like, if you don't have like really any, or really like no depth at 3 or the 4 position, or you're trying to put guys like Strus as the starting 3 and then kind of push him sometimes to play some minutes as your power forward, it just makes everything so much more difficult. So where the Cavs currently stand, if you were just to, trade Jarrett Allen for a Brandon Ingram, let's just say, and I don't think that's something that would happen anyways, but even if that did happen right now, you're still in a really awkward spot where you don't have a easy answer at power forward, and then you don't have an easy answer at backup power forward, depending on how you feel about Niang. And that's just a really difficult position to be in if you're going to make a move that is, that changes the trajectory of your team this much.
See, that's the way I should frame it. When people attack Jarrett Allen, I should just say, do you want more Niang? Is that
yeah.
Maybe I can win
the
them
trump
over
card
to my side.
That's all you got to say. But that balance, that delicate balance that you guys are mentioning, that's why we haven't gotten the report that the Cavs are trading Jarrett Allen as soon as possible, because it's not that straightforward. The Cavs have a lot of things they have to evaluate this summer, and so it could take time. I mean, I tweeted this, but like Dame and Donovan, they got traded in September of their respective deals. So this could take some time, even if the Cavs, like, they very well might just stick with Allen. But if they do decide to move him, even if Kobe right now is thinking we are 100% trading one of these members of the core, which he hasn't signaled that's what he wants to do, but even if he was thinking that, it's probably not going to happen at midnight as soon as it's available. It's going to take them some time. And so to officially transition to this topic, because look, there's been noise about the Cavs potentially trading Allen for a long time, and that noise has reached a deafening volume where some people are going to be upset if the Cavs run it back next season with the core four. Now, I find myself being more hesitant in that department. I understand the urgency to see some changes, but for me, and you guys have already mentioned this, but if you trade Allen, you are now officially betting on Mobley being his best when he's playing the five. And I think it's vital that you would get another big who could back him up and eat some of those minutes. But if you trade Allen, you're betting that Mobley's ceiling comes with him playing at center. So that's the primary thing you're hoping to accomplish if trading Allen is your prerogative. The other thing, of course, is just opening the floor in general. It's an oversimplification, but it is true. Having two non-shooting bigs, it makes floor spacing a little more difficult. An easy solution would be trading Allen and bringing in another shooter. And finally, you would hope that that shooter is a small forward who can play a little defense. So the ultimate objective there is you want to open the floor, get a wing, and open space for Mobley. And look, I agree that under the right circumstances, that could be a home run move. But my concern centers around what you lose when you trade Allen. And that's one of the best defensive bigs in the NBA, a true defensive anchor, someone who is one of the most efficient, dominant interior finishes you can find. He's an elite lob threat. He can set screens. He can roll to the rim with authority. And to tie all this together, something that has been said many times by Allen throughout the years, you might not always notice him on the court, but you sure do miss him when he isn't available. And that's a sentiment that could come back to haunt the Cavs if they move him this summer and it doesn't pan out the way you would hope.
I think you're just describing a center that would fit perfectly with Trae Young.
Here we go. Waited to the 37-minute mark to get us into that one.
That's all I had to say. I waited pretty long.
Yeah, sure.
Ridiculous. I don't want to tie Fro to Trae Young. That would be very disappointing outcome. It's like, what's next? Add Draymond Green to the team and just have Fro prop all of them up?
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak about Draymond Green because that's not what I'm here for. But Trae Young and Jarrett Allen, that's a pretty good pairing. But
Derek White.
We'll talk about that some other time.
Happy.
I'm not a Derek. I don't like Derek White. Anyways.
Yeah. Anyways,
sorry about that.
I kind of think we already answered this for the most part, but does anyone have any final comments about the pros and cons of what would happen if you traded Allen?
I mean, I again, it's like it's hard to evaluate it without knowing what's coming back because there's not ever going to be a trade in the NBA that improves one area but doesn't open up some questions in others. Not with any of these players at the magnitude of our core four. But that being said, it would just really kind of depend. We're in this period now where you see a lot of talk about stuff for just unproven guys, and that's the most risky form of a Jarrett Allen trade for me. So many times opposing fan base suggestions or reporter suggestions or just Bleacher Report mock trade articles they'll ignore whatever the Cavaliers would be trying to accomplish in a trade of a Darius Garland or a Jarrett Allen. And I think we can all agree nobody's looking to amass a bunch of picks when you're trying to convince Donovan Mitchell why he should want to stay here. They would need to be bringing talent back in an area that they feel like improving that area would more than make up for what we're going to lose in trading, whether it be Allen or whether it be Garland or whether it be whoever. And that's the thing that I would say is that I know we haven't talked about specific players, but even when you allude to things like Brandon Ingram and some of those other situations, is regardless of how you feel about Ingram as a player, he's still a very productive player on an NBA level who does a lot of things very well, even if he has holes in his game. So those are the types of constructions that I'd be way more willing to assess than talking about things like, oh, we want to get into the late lottery, so let's send Jarrett Allen to Memphis for the number 9 pick, and then maybe one of these rookies will be as good as that. Like, that's the type of gamble that I have no interest in making.
That's a huge gamble that they're just not in a position to where they need to make that at all, in my opinion.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how the Cavs handle free agency, because I don't think we're going to get a draft day Jarrett Allen trade or anything like that. So if you were planning on trading Jarrett Allen, you would want to use your mid-level on presumably a 4 or a 5. You may want to use it on a 4 anyways. But shoring up the front court is definitely something that you would really need to do if you're planning on trading Jarrett Allen. So kind of how they handle free agency and how they handle the draft too. Although you're not going to get an NBA minutes from 20 at least, unless you hit a home run.
Never say never.
The rare anomaly, but yeah, I don't think anyone's banking on that. We talked a little bit about this before the cameras are on, though, about like expectations of what you get out of that pick. And quite frankly, I would just be happy with somebody who in their first year doesn't look overwhelmed when they play backup minutes. Ultimately down the line, I'm hoping for a best case scenario of a top 8 rotation player, maybe even a starter in the future. But for the time being, I think if you can even get playable minutes during the course of the regular season where they're consistently finding their way in the games, that's about as much as you could hope for. And if we get more than that, then fantastic. Because I hear, when people talk about the draft, there's so much conversation about, well, there's not elite top end talent, but there's a lot of guys in that, whatever you want to call it, tier of players where it's like, if everybody's roughly kind of viewed with the same potential, then you never know. Certain guys in certain situations, just kind of opportunity is a huge part of that. And I certainly think that there's areas due to injuries or otherwise where the Cavaliers consistently have opportunities there for the taking. If a buyout guy can walk in and give us a season high in the playoff, like, I will never bet on this team not to have situations arise that don't give guys a chance to shine. So in that regard, I don't have these high expectations. But I do think one thing that this draft offers is a very good chance that some of those positions some of those archetypes we're looking to fill, there will be options available at 20. How they pan out is, anybody's guess.
And
I could talk myself into tons of different prospects, just knowing that the alternative is bringing back a Tristan Thompson or bringing back a Marcus Morris. I don't think it's a super high bar to clear. Like, if you're holding guys to an Allen Mobley standard, prepare to be disappointed. But if you're holding guys to just be better than Yang, just be more available than Dean Wade when we need him, if that's the standard, I think it's very possible that we come away happy.
That's exactly what I was going to say is, hey, listen, it's the 20th pick in a draft that is considered a weak draft. And so you shouldn't put too many expectations on it. Don't get your hopes up too high. But again, when you're looking at the Cavs situation, the bar is, can you give us minutes that are more productive than Niang, Morris, even if it's not next year, a couple years from now? What will Tristan Thompson look like next season, 2 years from now? If someone can come in and develop into something better than that, the bar is pretty low. And not to just completely trash Niang or Wade or anything like that. If you even just look at them, like, they've had moments throughout their career where they're productive. And I believe Wade was undrafted. Niang was a late pick. You look at Max Strus, Merrill, like, it's not, the 20th pick isn't super enticing, but it's not something that you should just throw out the window and say, hey, it's whatever, it's the 20th pick. There could be potential there. Now, of course, it's a gamble. I'm not a big draft guy. I have found prospects who I enjoy, but even then, I'm like, there's no telling if they're going to pan out. Best case scenario usually is even just being a rotational player. But again, it's important for any Cavs fans who are feeling pessimistic. It's important to keep that in mind, that there are players in every draft who go undrafted or who fall into the late first round and do end up being difference makers at some point in their career. And if you move on from Jarrett Allen, the need for that 20th pick to be a useful player it increases. You're going to have to really hope that that guy can come in and help you at some point in the next few years.
Well, here, I would want to say one other thing too, which I am probably irrationally too excited about, but this idea that now teams can trade players into exceptions instead of just having to sign them. You don't have to balance trades in that regard, where it's like, okay, it's always tough on the market to take these guys who are, because we're getting into this era where there's just this kind of universal clump of, okay, they're all about mid-level exception players. And now it's just going to be what market or what opportunity they pick to, best showcase their skills. So there's a lot of people with the same exceptions bidding for the same talent. I think it's nice to have an alternative avenue where, one of the stories we saw in the last week was about Vezenkov asking out in Sacramento because there wasn't a role for him. There's going to be situations where guys pop up who don't have a role on a team, who may be getting out of their salary. You saw it with the Warriors talking about waiving Kevon Looney just to avoid all the tax hit. Those are guys who could be productive in the right situations, and to have a new avenue of acquiring them, despite your situation with cap space, I think it's going to make for some interesting offseason storylines and some possibly unheralded additions, people who can find situations that better suit their skill set where both teams win, because some people just will want out of contracts, and to be able to do that by trading someone into exceptions where you don't have to take back salary in return could be win-wins for multiple trade partners.
Yeah, and to that point, that's another reason why the Cavs will probably take their time figuring out these big decisions, because they have to explore all their options. I know everyone feels very doomsday, but there's no need to rush this, especially if Donovan Mitchell signs that extension, which is going to be top priority. That's going to be the first thing they want to get out of the way. Mitchell signs the extension. You have some breathing room now. You don't need to rush and panic. Of course, there's the potential that he gives some conditions with that extension. I don't necessarily expect that. I don't want to dive into that speculation, but the point that I'm making is that the Cavs, they got some time to evaluate this. Now, again, to round this out, it's unfortunate they didn't get a true opportunity against Boston to really see what the core four looks like. They're going to have to make some educated guesses on all of this, but that's what the NBA is. At the end of the day, you gotta make some risks. You got to take a chance one way or the other, whether it's bringing the core four back, which is a risk in its own, or making a trade. And so I think we had a great discussion on Jarrett Allen, his season, his trade value, all that stuff. That's going to do it for this episode of the Junkyard Pod. I want to give Bob another special thank you for joining us today. It was an honor to finally have you on the show. And I want to thank you, the person listening or watching to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple. If you enjoyed the episode, again, please hit subscribe and drop a like to help support the channel. And with all that being said, go Cavs.
I agree. Go Cavs. Brian, what do you think about Trae Young?